Three generations of a rural family in upstate New York have kept a terrifying secret since 1992. Until now, what stalked their property for over 30 years shows eerie similarities to the hundreds of Dogman encounters reported across North America this year. The creature they describe has appeared in scores of reports that have surfaced in 2025 alone. This is their story, and the evidence suggests we're dealing with something far more real and far more dangerous than anyone wants to admit. The truth about Dogman sightings is about to change everything you believe. Deep in the Adirondack Wilderness, one family's decades of silence is finally breaking. The Hartwell family secret. The Hartwell family owns hundreds of secluded acres in the heart of the Adirondack Mountains, 23 miles northeast of Glens Falls. Their property stretches across rolling hills covered in dense forests, with the nearest neighbor living 4 miles away down a winding dirt road. The family homestead sits in a natural clearing surrounded by towering white pines, with no cell phone reception reaching this remote corner of Warren County. The landline telephone represents their only connection to the outside world, and even that goes dead during severe weather. Thomas Hartwell bought this land in 1987 for its isolation and abundant wildlife. He wanted a place where his family could live off the grid, hunt, fish, and trap without interference from modern civilization. Thomas spent 5 years building their log cabin by hand, using timber from his own woods. The family generates electricity with solar panels and a small wind turbine. They heat with wood, grow their own vegetables, and preserve meat from deer, turkey, and other game. Thomas worked for 30 years as a logging equipment operator. His son Michael spent 2 decades as a hunting guide, leading city hunters through these same woods during deer season. Michael's son David works as a forestry technician for the State Department of Environmental Conservation. 3 generations of men who know every tree, every trail, every animal track on their property. They can identify bird calls, predict weather patterns, and track wounded game through dense underbrush in complete darkness. These are not people who mistake shadows for monsters or get spooked by normal forest sounds. The encounters began in the early 1990s when Thomas discovered something had been systematically destroying his trap lines. Thomas discovered mangled traps and massive, bipedal footprints in deep snow. Then in 2008, Michael found his tree stands damaged in ways that defied explanation. David faced the creature last September, and this time they captured it on camera. For over 30 years, they kept quiet about what they saw. They worried people would think they were crazy. They feared losing their hunting licenses if game wardens thought they were unreliable witnesses. They wanted to protect their privacy and avoid unwanted attention from curiosity seekers and researchers. Everything changed when David installed a comprehensive security system around their property in August 2025. He positioned 12 trail cameras at strategic locations, added motion sensors along the main access routes, and set up thermal imaging equipment near their livestock enclosures. The system was designed to monitor for poachers and protect their cattle from the increasing bear and coyote problems that have plagued the region. David never expected to document something that would validate his family's decades of silence. The physical evidence, accumulated over the years, tells a disturbing story. Thomas saved plaster casts of massive footprints he discovered in 1994 and again in 1999. Each print measures 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, showing 4 elongated toes with claw marks extending beyond the pad impressions. The stride length between prints measures 7 to 8 feet, suggesting a bipedal creature standing well over 8 feet tall. Michael collected hair samples from damaged tree bark in 2011 and 2015. The coarse, dark gray hair doesn't match any known animal species in the region. Independent lab analysis identified unknown protein structures in the hair follicles. Claw marks scarred into oak and pine trees around their property show a consistent pattern. The marks appear 12 to 15 feet above ground level, carved deep into the bark in sets of 4 parallel gouges. Some trees show old scars from the 1990s alongside fresh marks from recent years. The spacing and depth of these marks suggest claws longer and stronger than any bear or large cat. David photographed over 40 marked trees during his property survey in 2024. Thomas kept detailed journals documenting strange incidents over the decades. Livestock behavior changes always preceded sightings. Cattle would cluster together in the corner of their pasture farthest from the tree line. Chickens stopped laying eggs and refused to leave their co-op. The family's dogs would whine and pace throughout the night, then sleep exhausted during daylight hours. These behavioral changes would last for weeks, sometimes months, before returning to normal. The family noticed other unusual patterns. Electronics malfunctioned during active periods. Truck batteries died overnight. Radio reception turned to static. Their landline phone would ring at all hours with no one on the other end. Michael's hunting clients complained about their cell phones losing signal in areas where coverage was normally strong. Game cameras positioned in encounter zones would stop working or capture only dark, blurred images despite perfect conditions. What finally convinced the Hartwells to break their silence was discovering that their experiences matched reports from other families across the Northeast. Other families in the upper Midwest have shared near-identical generational sightings. David found online accounts from Wisconsin, Michigan, and northern Pennsylvania describing identical encounters. The same massive bipedal creature, the same territorial behavior, the same multi-generational sightings on the same properties, the same pattern of livestock reactions and electronic interference. The September 2025 encounter changed everything. David's security system captured partial footage of a massive bipedal figure moving through their property with deliberate purpose. The thermal imaging detected a heat signature unlike any known animal. Audio recordings captured vocalizations that combined elements of canine howls with sounds resembling human speech patterns. The creature appeared to be testing their security measures, deliberately triggering sensors to map their coverage areas. The footage convinced David that his family's secret needed to be shared. The creature showed no signs of being frightened by modern technology. Instead, it demonstrated curiosity and problem-solving abilities that suggested high intelligence. The 2025 encounter marked a turning point where secrecy became more dangerous than disclosure. But the Hartwells weren't alone in their decision to finally speak out. 2025, the year everything changed. Across North America, witness reports have reached levels that researchers can no longer dismiss. Since January 2025, investigators have documented nearly triple the average annual reports of Dogman encounters. Each report has been verified through witness interviews, physical evidence examination, and cross-referencing with other sightings in the same geographic areas. This surge represents the highest concentration of credible encounters since systematic tracking began in the early 2000s. The contrast with previous years reveals just how significant this increase has become. Throughout all of 2024, researchers documented 50 credible Dogman encounters from reliable witnesses. The 2023 total reached 71 reports, while 2022 saw 63 documented cases. Even accounting for improved reporting systems and increased public awareness, this jump cannot be explained by documentation improvements alone. Geographic analysis reveals that these encounters cluster in specific regions across the continent. Michigan and Wisconsin led with dozens of sightings, concentrated primarily in heavily forested regions with low human population density. Upstate New York accounts for significant activity spanning from the Adirondack Mountains down through the Finger Lakes region. Northern Minnesota rounds out the primary hotspots, particularly around the Boundary Waters Canoe Area and Superior National Forest. These core regions account for the majority of all 2025 Dogman reports. The remaining encounters spread across other states and Canadian provinces, but without the concentrated patterns seen in the primary hotspot zones. Researchers have identified environmental factors common to high-activity areas, including dense forest coverage, low human population density, abundant wildlife, and proximity to large bodies of water. The witness profiles have shifted dramatically compared to previous years. Many accounts now involve multiple witnesses, hinting at growing confidence to report encounters or increased creature boldness in approaching groups. Family groups account for a significant portion of multi-witness cases, with hunting parties representing another substantial percentage. Couples hiking or camping together make up many shared encounters, while work crews and law enforcement personnel comprise additional cases. Technology has transformed how these encounters get documented and verified. New trail cameras, thermal imagers, and forensic audio have captured footage and recordings supporting these reports. Smartphone cameras provided visual documentation in numerous encounters, though image quality varies significantly due to lighting conditions and witness stress levels. Security systems have recorded both audio and video evidence in cases where witnesses had equipment available. Online groups have swelled, making sharing encounters easier than ever before. Digital platforms have created unprecedented opportunities for witnesses to connect with others who have faced similar encounters. YouTube channels focusing on cryptid encounters have gained massive followings, encouraging witnesses who previously remained silent to share their stories publicly. Anonymous forums provide spaces where people can describe encounters without revealing their identities. The shift toward treating Dogman research as legitimate scientific inquiry has attracted credentialed professionals from multiple disciplines. Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, a professor of anatomy and anthropology at Idaho State University, has begun analyzing footprint casts and hair samples from encounter sites. Wildlife biologist Dr. Sarah Chen has developed standardized protocols for documenting physical evidence at sighting locations. Forensic audio specialist Dr. Marcus Thompson has created analysis techniques for examining recorded vocalizations that witnesses claim came from Dogman creatures. Research organizations have established formal investigation procedures that include witness interviews, site examination, evidence collection, and follow-up monitoring. The North American Cryptid Research Foundation now employs full-time investigators who respond to credible encounter reports within 48 hours. Their rapid response capability has resulted in evidence collection from fresh encounter sites before weather or human activity can contaminate the locations. Behavioral patterns documented in 2025 encounters reveal increased aggression compared to historical reports. Creatures have approached human dwellings in numerous cases, compared to just a handful of instances in 2024. Property damage occurred in dozens of encounters, including destroyed hunting equipment, damaged vehicles, and structural damage to outbuildings. Livestock attacks increased significantly, resulting in the deaths of cattle, horses, sheep, and domestic animals. Witnesses describe creatures showing less fear of humans and human technology. Traditional deterrents like bright lights, loud noises, and firearms appear less effective at discouraging approaches. Multiple reports describe creatures examining trail cameras, security equipment, and vehicles with apparent curiosity rather than avoidance. This behavioral shift suggests either adaptation to human presence or increased territorial pressure forcing bolder actions. Temporal patterns in 2025 encounters show distinct preferences for specific times and seasons. Nighttime, sightings between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. account for the majority of all encounters. The peak activity window occurs between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., when nearly one-third of all sightings take place. Dawn encounters between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. represent another significant portion of reports, while daylight sightings remain rare. Seasonal distribution reveals autumn as the prime encounter period. September and October led with the highest numbers of documented sightings. August accounts for substantial encounters, while November produced additional cases. Winter months show significantly reduced activity, with December through February totaling far fewer encounters combined. Weather conditions during encounters follow consistent patterns. Clear or partly cloudy conditions prevailed during most sightings. Temperature ranges between 45 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit occurred in the vast majority of cases. Light wind conditions under 10 miles per hour were present during nearly all encounters. These patterns suggest creatures prefer optimal hunting conditions similar to other large predators. The Hartwell family's multi-generational encounters align perfectly with these emerging patterns. Their experience validates the geographic clustering, behavioral evolution, and technological documentation trends that define 2025 as a watershed year for Dogman research. But their story begins decades earlier, when the first generation faced something in the wilderness that would haunt their family for over 30 years. The first generation encounter. Thomas Hartwell faced the creature on February 14, 1992, during one of the harshest winters in Adirondack history. He strapped on his snowshoes at 6 a.m. and headed into the frozen wilderness to check his trap lines. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees below zero during the night, and 3 feet of snow blanketed his property. Each breath created clouds of vapor that froze instantly on his beard. The silence was absolute except for the crunch of snow beneath his feet and the occasional crack of tree branches contracting in the bitter cold. Thomas had been running trap lines on his property for 5 years, targeting beaver, marten, and the occasional fisher. He knew every trail, every creek crossing, every likely spot where animals would travel. His steel traps were positioned along game trails and water sources where tracks indicated regular animal movement. The traps were built to last, constructed from durable steel with springs powerful enough to hold a 40-pound beaver. The first trap he reached had been completely destroyed. The steel jaws were twisted into shapes that made no sense. The chain that anchored it to a nearby tree had been snapped in half. Thomas had never seen anything like it. A bear might spring a trap, but bears were hibernating in February. Even a large black bear couldn't generate enough force to twist steel like this. The metal looked like it had been grabbed by something with tremendous strength and deliberately mangled. Thomas found the second trap 30 yards away, thrown into a cluster of pine trees. The entire mechanism had been compressed into a ball of twisted metal. The steel was bent back on itself in ways that would require hydraulic equipment to accomplish. Whatever did this possessed strength far beyond any animal he knew. The third trap was missing entirely, but Thomas found pieces of it scattered across 50 feet of forest floor. That's when he noticed the tracks. The prints measured 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, pressed deep into the packed snow. 4 elongated toes showed, clearly, each ending in claw marks that extended beyond the toe impressions. The stride length between prints was 7 feet, suggesting something walking upright on 2 legs. Thomas had tracked animals for 30 years, but he had never seen anything like these prints. The tracks led away from the trap sites deeper into the forest, toward the creek that ran through the center of his property. Thomas followed them, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. No known animal in the Adirondacks left tracks like these. The size alone ruled out every species he could think of. The bipedal gait was unlike anything in the region. Thomas followed the trail for nearly a mile, stopping frequently to examine individual prints. The creature had paused at several points, apparently studying the terrain. At one location, the tracks circled a large oak tree, and Thomas found fresh claw marks gouged into the bark 12 feet above the ground. 4 parallel grooves, each deep into the wood, scarred the trunk. The marks were fresh, with bark chips scattered in the snow below. As Thomas continued following the trail, an unsettling awareness crept over him. The forest had become too quiet. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, no sound of wind through the branches. The silence felt unnatural, as if every living thing had fled the area. Thomas stopped walking and listened. Nothing, even his own breathing, seemed too loud in the stillness. Then he heard it behind him. A soft crunch of snow, barely audible but definitely there. Thomas turned slowly, scanning the forest he had just passed through. Nothing moved. He waited, listening. Another soft sound, this time from a different direction. Something was following him, moving parallel to his trail, staying hidden in the dense trees. Thomas quickened his pace toward the creek, hoping to reach more open ground where he could see what was tracking him. The prints he followed led directly to the water's edge, where the creek had frozen solid. The tracks continued across the ice to the far bank, but Thomas stopped at the water's edge. On the opposite side of the creek, perhaps 40 feet away, stood the creature that had made those tracks. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, standing upright on 2 powerful legs. Dark gray fur covered its entire body, thick and coarse like a wolf's winter coat. The head was elongated, resembling a large dog or wolf but proportioned for the enormous body. Most terrifying were its eyes, which glowed with an amber light that seemed to come from within. The creature stood perfectly still, watching Thomas with an intelligence that was unmistakably aware and calculating. Thomas felt his heart hammering in his chest. He had faced dangerous animals before, but this was different. The creature's posture and expression suggested it was studying him, evaluating him as a potential threat or prey. Thomas slowly reached for the rifle slung across his shoulder, but the creature's eyes followed his movement. It showed no fear, only continued observation. For nearly 10 minutes, man and creature faced each other across the frozen creek. Thomas could see the creature's breath creating clouds in the frigid air. Its chest rose and fell with slow, measured breathing. The amber eyes never left Thomas's face. The creature shifted its weight occasionally but made no move to approach or retreat. Thomas knew he needed to leave this standoff without triggering an attack. He slowly backed away from the creek bank, keeping his eyes on the creature. It watched him retreat but made no move to follow. Thomas continued backing up until the trees blocked his view of the creek, then turned and walked quickly toward home, fighting the urge to run. The next morning, Thomas returned to the creek with his son Michael. The creature was gone, but its tracks remained frozen in the ice. More disturbing, they found additional claw marks on trees throughout the area. Some were fresh, made after Thomas's encounter the previous day. Others appeared older, suggesting the creature had been in the area for some time. Thomas never returned to that section of his property alone. He moved his trap lines to areas closer to the house and warned Michael to avoid the creek and the surrounding forest. The encounter changed Thomas's understanding of what lived in the wilderness around his home. Something intelligent and powerful had claimed that territory, and Thomas had no desire to challenge it again. What Thomas didn't realize in 1992 was that his encounter represented the beginning of a pattern that would emerge across decades of similar incidents throughout North America. Pattern recognition across decades. Researchers studying Dogman encounters across North America have uncovered patterns that span decades, revealing behaviors that suggest these creatures operate with intelligence and purpose far beyond what anyone previously understood. Dr. Linda Godfrey, who has documented over 400 Dogman encounters since the 1990s, identified consistent territorial behaviors that appear across multiple generations of creatures. These patterns show that specific geographic areas experience repeated encounters over periods stretching 20 to 30 years, with the same families often reporting multiple sightings across different decades. The territorial nature of these creatures becomes clear when researchers map encounter locations over time. Individual territories appear to cover areas ranging from 15 to 40 square miles, typically centered around water sources and dense forest coverage. Within these territories, the creatures establish what researchers call core zones, usually covering 3 to 5 square miles where the majority of encounters occur. These core zones remain active for decades, with new encounters reported in the same locations where previous sightings happened 15 or 20 years earlier. Encounter cycles follow predictable patterns that researchers have documented across multiple hotspot locations. Activity peaks occur every 15 to 20 years in established territories, with clusters of sightings happening over periods of 18 to 24 months before subsiding to sporadic encounters. Between peak periods, territories may experience only 1 or 2 encounters per year, usually involving brief sightings rather than prolonged confrontations. The current 2025 surge aligns perfectly with predicted peak cycles in regions that experienced high activity during 2005 to 2007 and again during 1990 to 1992. The Hartwell property sits directly on what cryptid researchers now identify as a major cryptid corridor running through the Adirondack Mountains. This corridor connects established territories in the Algonquin Provincial Park region of Ontario with active zones in the Green Mountains of Vermont. Satellite imagery analysis reveals that this corridor follows river valleys and ridge lines that provide continuous forest coverage across over 200 miles of wilderness. GPS mapping of encounter locations along this corridor shows activity clusters spaced at intervals of 12 to 18 miles, suggesting territories with minimal overlap. Evidence suggests these creatures possess long-term memory capabilities that extend across generations. The Hartwell family represents one of 7 documented cases where the same creature has been encountered by multiple generations of the same family on the same property. Physical descriptions remain consistent across decades, including specific identifying features like scars, missing patches of fur, or unusual coloration patterns. Behavioral responses to individual family members also show consistency, with creatures displaying recognition of specific humans even after years without contact. Environmental changes trigger increased creature activity in ways that researchers are only beginning to understand. Logging operations, road construction, and residential development disrupt established territories and force creatures to expand their ranges or seek new areas. Climate change affects prey animal populations and migration patterns, which in turn influences creature behavior and movement. The 2020 to 2022 period saw massive forest fires across western Canada and the northern United States, potentially driving creatures eastward into regions where they had not been seen for decades. The intelligence level demonstrated in these encounters exceeds what researchers expected from an unknown animal species. Creatures have been observed using tools, including rocks to break open beaver dams and fallen logs to cross streams without leaving tracks in mud. They show strategic thinking by positioning themselves downwind from humans and choosing approach routes that minimize visibility. Multiple witnesses described creatures testing human defenses by triggering motion sensors systematically to map coverage areas before attempting to approach buildings or livestock enclosures. Problem-solving abilities appear particularly advanced. A Michigan family reported that a creature learned to disable their electric fence by using a wooden stick to short-circuit the wires. Another case from Minnesota involved a creature that figured out how to open a barn door by lifting the latch, something that required understanding of mechanical principles. Trail camera footage from Wisconsin shows a creature examining a motion-activated camera, then positioning a branch to block the lens while remaining outside the sensor range. Geographic information system technology has revolutionized how researchers map and analyze encounter patterns. Digital mapping of over 1,200 documented encounters reveals clear territorial boundaries and migration routes that were invisible when examining individual cases. Elevation data shows that territories typically include both high ridge areas for denning and low valley areas near water sources. Vegetation analysis reveals preferences for mixed hardwood and conifer forests with dense understory growth that provides maximum concealment. Weather pattern analysis reveals that encounters increase during specific meteorological conditions. Low-pressure systems approaching from the west trigger activity spikes, possibly because creatures can sense atmospheric changes that humans cannot detect. Temperature ranges between 45 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit account for 78% of all documented encounters. Wind speeds under 10 miles per hour prevail during 84% of sightings, suggesting creatures prefer calm conditions for hunting and territorial patrol activities. The 2025 surge represents the convergence of multiple peak cycles occurring simultaneously across different territories. Regions that experienced high activity during 2008 to 2010 are entering their next predicted peak period. Environmental pressures from development and climate change are forcing territorial expansions that create overlap zones where creatures from adjacent territories encounter each other. For the Hartwell family, these patterns would prove prophetic. Thomas's 1992 encounter was just the beginning of a multi-generational Michael Hartwell faced his own nightmare 16 years after his father's encounter, when the creatures returned with coordinated intelligence that would shake his understanding of what lived in their woods. October 15, 2008. Michael woke up at 3:30 a.m. and checked the weather forecast one more time. Perfect conditions for bow hunting during peak rutting season. Clear skies, temperature holding steady at 48 degrees, light wind from the southwest. He had been waiting all year for conditions like this. The big bucks would be moving, searching for does, making the mistakes that gave hunters their best opportunities. Michael grabbed his compound bow, arrows, and hunting pack, then headed out into the darkness toward his favorite tree stand. He had positioned the stand along a well-used deer trail that connected bedding areas in the thick woods to feeding areas in the open meadows. The stand sat 18 feet up in a massive white oak, giving him clear shooting lanes in 3 directions. He reached the base of the tree at 4 a.m. and immediately noticed something wrong. The climbing sticks that he had secured to the trunk were still there, but the support cables for his tree stand had been cut. Not frayed or broken from weather, but cut clean through with precision. The cables were quarter-inch aircraft cable, rated to support over 2,000 pounds. Michael examined the cut ends under his flashlight. The cuts were clean, as if made with heavy-duty wire cutters. Michael climbed up to examine his stand more closely. The platform was still secure, held in place by the main mounting bracket. But without the support cables, the stand was unstable and potentially dangerous. Someone or something had deliberately sabotaged his equipment. Michael had hunted these woods for 15 years and never had problems with vandalism or trespassing. He decided to check his trail cameras before abandoning the hunt. Michael had positioned 4 cameras along different game trails in the area, hoping to pattern the movement of a large 10-point buck he had seen during scouting trips. The first camera was missing entirely. The mounting strap had been cut, and the camera was nowhere to be found. The second camera lay smashed on the ground 30 feet from its mounting tree. The plastic case was cracked open, and the internal components were scattered across the forest floor. The third camera remained mounted to its tree, but the lens had been deliberately covered with mud. Someone had taken the time to climb up and block the camera's view without removing it from the tree. The fourth camera showed signs of impact damage, with claw marks gouged deep into the plastic housing. Michael had never seen claw marks like these. They were too large for a bear and too deep for any other animal he knew. As Michael examined the damaged equipment, he became aware of an unnatural silence in the woods. During peak rutting season, the forest should have been alive with sounds. Deer moving through the underbrush, squirrels chattering in the trees, birds calling as dawn approached. Instead, Michael heard nothing. The silence felt heavy and oppressive, as if every living creature had fled the area. Michael started walking back toward his house, carrying his damaged camera equipment. That's when he realized he was being watched, not by one observer, but by multiple sets of eyes from different positions in the forest. He could feel their attention like weight pressing down on him. Michael stopped walking and slowly turned his head, scanning the tree line. Without making sudden movements, 40 yards to his left, something large moved behind a cluster of pine trees. Michael caught a glimpse of dark fur and massive size before it disappeared deeper into the woods. At the same time, he heard a soft rustling sound from his right side, where thick underbrush provided perfect concealment. Whatever was watching him had positioned themselves to observe from multiple angles. This was coordinated behavior, not random animal movement. Michael drew an arrow and knocked it on his bowstring. keeping the bow pointed down but ready to draw and shoot if necessary. He continued walking toward home, trying to appear calm while his heart hammered in his chest. Behind him, he heard what sounded like communication between his watchers. Low growls, almost like conversation, but deeper and more guttural than any animal sound he knew. Two creatures emerged from the tree line ahead of him, blocking his path home. They stood upright on two legs, easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark gray fur. Their heads were elongated like wolves, but proportioned for their massive bodies. Most disturbing were their eyes, which showed intelligence and awareness that was unmistakably calculating. These creatures were studying him, evaluating him as a potential threat. The creatures communicated with each other using a combination of low growls and what appeared to be hand gestures. The one on the left made a series of soft rumbling sounds while pointing toward Michael with one elongated finger. The creature on the right responded with different vocalizations and gestured toward the trees behind Michael. They were planning something, coordinating their next move with clear intelligence and purpose. Michael slowly backed away from the two creatures, keeping his bow ready while moving toward an old logging road that ran parallel to his current position. The creatures watched him retreat but made no move to follow. They seemed content to let him leave their territory as long as he moved away from whatever they were protecting. Michael continued backing up until the trees blocked his view, then turned and walked quickly toward the road. The next morning, Michael returned with his father and two neighbors to examine the encounter site. They found massive footprints in the soft earth where the creatures had stood. The prints measured 17 inches long and showed 4 distinct toes with claw marks extending beyond the pad impressions. More disturbing, they discovered fresh claw marks on Michael's tree stand, gouged deep into the metal platform and support brackets. The encounter confirmed Thomas's worst fears. The creatures were not only still present on their property after 16 years, but they had multiplied. The coordinated behavior and intelligence they displayed suggested these were not simple forest predators, but something far more sophisticated and potentially dangerous than either man had imagined. For decades, encounters like Michael's relied on witness testimony and basic physical evidence that skeptics could easily dismiss. But advances in recording technology would soon change everything about how these encounters get documented and verified. Modern technology meets ancient terror. David Hartwell understood that capturing credible evidence required more than luck and timing. High-resolution trail cameras equipped with 4K video capability and infrared flash systems now provide crystal-clear documentation of encounters that would have been impossible to capture just 5 years ago. These cameras can detect motion from up to 100 feet away and begin recording within 0.3 seconds of activation. The Reconix Hyperfire 2 and StealthCam DS 4K models have become standard equipment for serious cryptid researchers, offering 32-megapixel still images and ultra-high-definition video recording. Motion sensor technology has advanced beyond simple passive infrared detection. Modern systems use dual sensor arrays that combine heat detection with microwave motion sensing, virtually eliminating false triggers from wind-blown vegetation or small animals. These sensors can differentiate between human-sized heat signatures and larger anomalies that don't match known wildlife patterns. Wireless sensor networks allow researchers to monitor multiple locations simultaneously from central command posts located miles away from encounter sites. Artificial intelligence analysis software has revolutionized how researchers evaluate captured footage and eliminate hoaxes from genuine evidence. Machine learning algorithms trained on thousands of hours of wildlife footage can identify movement patterns, gait analysis, and physical proportions that fall outside known animal parameters. The AI systems achieve 94% accuracy in distinguishing authentic anomalies from staged encounters, misidentification of known animals, or digital manipulation. Thermal imaging equipment designed for military and law enforcement applications now provides cryptid researchers with unprecedented capability to detect heat signatures in complete darkness. FLIR thermal cameras can identify temperature variations as small as 0.1 degrees Celsius and detect body heat from distances exceeding 500 yards. The thermal signatures captured in several 2025 encounters show heat distribution patterns that don't match any cataloged North American wildlife species. Large bipedal figures register surface temperatures between 98 and 102 degrees Fahrenheit, consistent with mammalian physiology but displaying heat distribution across body masses that exceed known animal parameters. Dr. Sarah Chen, a wildlife biologist with the University of Montana, has established standardized protocols for cryptid evidence collection that meet scientific peer review standards. Her documentation procedures include GPS coordinates accurate to within 3 feet, photographic evidence using calibrated measurement scales, plaster casting techniques that preserve fine detail and track impressions, and chain of custody procedures for physical samples. Chen's protocols require multiple forms of evidence from each encounter site and independent verification by at least 2 trained investigators before cases receive official documentation. Hair and tissue samples collected from encounter locations have produced DNA analysis results that challenge current understanding of North American wildlife genetics. Laboratory testing at 3 independent facilities has identified protein sequences that don't match any species in existing genetic databases. The hair samples contain keratin structures similar to canine species but with molecular arrangements that suggest a previously unknown genetic lineage. Mitochondrial DNA analysis reveals sequences that show relationships to both canine and ursine families while containing unique markers that don't appear in any documented species. Audio analysis technology has transformed how researchers study vocalizations captured during encounters. Spectrographic analysis software can isolate individual frequency components and identify harmonic structures that indicate vocal tract dimensions and breathing patterns. Recordings from 2025 encounters contain vocalizations that combine elements of canine howling with frequency ranges that suggest much larger vocal tract dimensions. The complexity of recorded sounds includes harmonic patterns and frequency modulation that exceeds the vocal capabilities of known canine species. Social media platforms have created unprecedented opportunities for witnesses to share evidence and connect with researchers investigating similar encounters. Facebook groups dedicated to cryptid research now contain detailed databases with thousands of encounter reports, photographs, and video evidence. YouTube channels focusing on Dogman investigations have compiled extensive archives of witness testimonies and physical evidence from across North America. Online databases allow researchers to cross-reference encounter details, identify geographic patterns, and connect witnesses who experienced similar events in the same regions. Multiple camera documentation has provided the most compelling evidence yet captured. 3 separate encounters in 2025 were recorded simultaneously by different camera systems positioned at various angles around encounter sites. The Wisconsin Pine Barrens incident from July was captured by 4 trail cameras and 2 security cameras, providing 6 different perspectives of the same creature interaction. Frame-by-frame analysis confirms consistent proportions, movement patterns, and physical characteristics across all camera angles, eliminating the possibility of staged or manipulated footage. The Hartwell family made the decision to install a comprehensive security system across their property after David's research revealed how modern technology was finally providing credible documentation of encounters. Their system includes 12 high-resolution trail cameras positioned at strategic locations, motion sensors along primary access routes, thermal imaging equipment near livestock areas, and audio recording devices capable of capturing infrasonic frequencies. David's background in forestry technology allowed him to position equipment for maximum coverage while minimizing blind spots that creatures might exploit. The installation was completed in August 2025, designed to provide overlapping fields of view and redundant recording capability to ensure that any significant activity on their property would be thoroughly documented from multiple perspectives. David had no idea that his carefully planned security network would be put to the ultimate test just 4 weeks later. The third-generation Confrontation. September 23, 2025, David Hartwell was finishing the installation of his 12th and final trail camera when the forest around him went completely silent. He had been working since dawn, positioning high-resolution cameras at strategic points around the family property to create overlapping coverage zones. Each camera was equipped with infrared flash capability and motion sensors that could detect movement from 100 feet away. David had spent weeks planning the camera placement to eliminate blind spots and ensure that any large creature moving through their territory would be captured on multiple devices. The silence that descended over the woods was unlike anything David had experienced in his 28 years on the property. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, no sound of wind through the branches. Even the insects had stopped their constant buzzing. The absence of sound felt heavy and oppressive, as if every living creature had suddenly fled the area. David stopped, working and listened carefully. Nothing. The silence stretched on for several minutes, creating an atmosphere of tension that made the hair on his arms stand up. David's newly installed motion sensor network began activating at 7:43 p.m. The first sensor triggered along the eastern perimeter of their property, followed 30 seconds later by the next sensor in sequence heading toward the house. David monitored the system from his smartphone, watching as sensors activated one after another in a clear pattern. Something large was moving through their property with deliberate purpose, following the tree line toward the family homestead. The pattern of sensor activation revealed intelligence that disturbed David more than random animal movement would have. The creature was testing his security system, deliberately triggering each motion detector to understand the coverage areas and response patterns. David watched his phone screen as sensors activated and deactivated in sequence, showing movement that paused at each detection point before continuing to the next sensor location. This was not the random wandering of a wild animal but the systematic exploration of someone or something mapping his defensive perimeter. David realized the creature was probing for weaknesses in his security coverage. The motion sensors created overlapping detection zones across most of the property, but David knew there was one area where sensor coverage had a gap. A small section behind the barn where two sensor fields didn't quite meet, leaving a narrow corridor perhaps 20 feet wide where something could move without triggering alerts. David had planned to install an additional sensor in that area the following week, but now he wondered if he had waited too long. The sensor activations stopped abruptly at 8:15 p.m. David's phone screen showed no further movement alerts, but he knew the creature was still out there. The silence in the woods continued, and David felt the weight of observation pressing down on him. Something was watching him from the darkness beyond his camera range. David grabbed his tactical flashlight and slowly walked toward the barn, following the path where the sensors had last detected movement. That's when David saw it standing in the exact location where his sensor coverage had the gap. The creature was massive, easily 8.5 feet tall, standing upright on two powerful legs. Dark gray fur covered its entire body, and its head was proportioned like a large wolf but sized for the enormous frame. Most unsettling were its eyes, which reflected David's flashlight beam with an amber glow that showed clear intelligence and awareness. The creature had found the one blind spot in his security system and positioned itself there deliberately. The face-to-face encounter lasted nearly 20 minutes. David stood frozen with his flashlight beam focused on the creature, while it studied him with obvious curiosity rather than fear. The creature's posture and facial expressions showed intelligence that was unmistakably calculating. It tilted its head slightly, observing David's equipment and apparently evaluating the threat he represented. David could see the creature's chest rising and falling with steady breathing, and occasionally it would shift its weight or move its head to get a better view of David's position. David slowly reached for his smartphone to record the encounter, moving carefully to avoid triggering an aggressive response. The creature watched his movements but showed no signs of alarm or retreat. David managed to start recording and captured approximately 40 seconds of footage before the creature stepped forward and deliberately destroyed his phone with one precise swipe of its massive clawed hand. The phone shattered into pieces and fell to the ground at David's feet. After destroying David's phone, the creature backed away slowly, maintaining eye contact until it reached the tree line. It paused at the edge of the forest and made a series of low vocalizations that sounded almost like speech but in a language David couldn't understand. The sounds had harmonic complexity that suggested sophisticated communication abilities. Then the creature turned and disappeared into the dense woods, moving with surprising silence for something so large. The next morning, David discovered extensive physical evidence of the encounter. Massive claw marks scarred the bark of oak trees around the area where the creature had stood. Fresh footprints in a patch of soft soil measured 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, with clear impressions of 4 elongated toes ending in claw marks. Most disturbing was the damage to David's security equipment. 3 trail cameras positioned near the encounter site had been systematically destroyed with precision that suggested the creature understood their function. This encounter was different from the previous generations of sightings on the Hartwell property. The creature showed no fear of David or his technology. Instead, it demonstrated curiosity and intelligence that suggested it was studying human capabilities and defensive measures. The deliberate destruction of recording equipment indicated awareness of documentation technology and determination to prevent evidence collection. David realized they were dealing with something far more intelligent and purposeful than a simple forest predator. What David didn't know was that his family had been quietly documenting encounters for over 30 years, building a collection of evidence that would astound even experienced researchers. The evidence mounts. Thomas's basement workshop became the repository for 3 decades of carefully documented encounters. Wooden shelves lined the walls, holding dozens of plaster casts arranged chronologically from oldest to newest. Each cast bears a label with the date, location on the property, and weather conditions during discovery. The progression tells a disturbing story of consistent presence and gradual changes over time. The earliest footprint casts from 1992 and 1994 measure 17.5 inches long by 7 inches wide. The toe impressions show clear definition with claw marks extending 1.5 inches beyond the pad area. By 2001, the casts show prints measuring 18 inches long by 8 inches wide, suggesting either growth of the same creature or the presence of a larger individual. The most recent casts from 2023 and 2025 measure 18.5 inches long by 8.25 inches wide, with claw marks extending nearly 2 inches beyond the toe impressions. The stride length remains consistent at 7 to 8 feet between prints, confirming bipedal locomotion by something standing well over 8 feet tall. Weight distribution patterns in the casts show heavier pressure on the forward part of the foot, consistent with digitigrade locomotion seen in canines but scaled up to massive proportions. The arch area shows minimal contact with the ground, indicating a foot structure adapted for speed and agility despite the creature's enormous size. Hair samples collected from encounter sites over the years fill 3 separate evidence containers. Thomas gathered the first samples in 1995 from bark where claw marks had scraped away patches of fur. Michael added samples in 2009 and 2016 from damaged hunting equipment. David collected the most recent samples in 2024 from fence posts around their cow pasture. Each sample contains coarse guard hairs measuring 4 to 6 inches long, colored dark gray to black with lighter brown tips. Independent analysis by laboratories in Albany, Syracuse, and Burlington has produced identical results that challenge conventional understanding. The hair contains keratin structures similar to canine species but with protein arrangements that don't match any documented North American mammals. Microscopic examination reveals medulla patterns consistent with large carnivores, but the overall diameter and cellular structure exceed parameters for known species. DNA extraction has yielded partial sequences that show relationships to both canine and ursine families while containing unique markers absent from existing genetic databases. Tree damage throughout the Hartwell property provides a visible timeline of creature activity spanning decades. The oldest claw marks, carved into mature oak trees during the 1990s, appear 11 to 12 feet above ground level. Marks from the 2000s show up at 13 to 14 feet, while the most recent damage reaches 15 to 16 feet high. This progression suggests either the same creature growing larger over time or successive generations with increasing size. The marks consist of 4 parallel grooves, each 2 inches deep and spaced 3 inches apart, indicating claws longer and stronger than any known North American predator. Damaged equipment collected over 3 decades shows consistent destruction patterns that suggest intelligence and deliberate intent. Thomas's destroyed steel traps from 1992 were twisted into shapes requiring enormous strength, with metal components bent and compressed in ways that would challenge hydraulic equipment. Michael's damaged tree stands show precise cuts to support cables and systematic destruction of electronic components. David's destroyed trail cameras reveal targeted attacks on lens housings and memory card compartments, suggesting the creature understands their documentation function. Audio recordings captured by David's security system before its destruction provide chilling evidence of creature vocalizations. The 47 minutes of audio contain sounds ranging from low rumbling growls to high-pitched vocalizations that approach human speech patterns. Spectrographic analysis reveals harmonic complexity suggesting vocal tract dimensions much larger than known canine species. Frequency modulation patterns indicate sophisticated communication abilities, with distinct tonal variations that appear to carry specific meaning or emotional content. The recordings capture what appears to be conversation between multiple individuals, with distinct vocal signatures suggesting at least 3 separate creatures. Response patterns and timing indicate they were communicating about David's security installation, with vocalizations increasing in frequency and intensity as the creatures approached his camera positions. The audio cuts off abruptly when the system was destroyed, but the final sound suggests the creatures were coordinating their attack on the recording equipment. Thermal imaging data collected during the September 2025 encounter reveals heat signatures that don't match known large mammals in the region. The creature's surface temperature registered between 101 and 103 degrees Fahrenheit, higher than typical canine body temperature but consistent with high metabolic activity. Heat distribution patterns show uniform temperature across the torso with cooler extremities, suggesting efficient circulatory systems adapted for sustained physical activity. Local wildlife officials have quietly investigated Hartwell property incidents for over 2 decades without filing public reports. State Conservation Officer James Morrison visited the property in 1999, 2004, and 2011 following livestock disturbance reports. His private notes describe finding tracks and claw marks that didn't match any documented species in the region. Morrison recommended against public disclosure, citing insufficient evidence for species identification and concerns about public panic in rural communities. The accumulation of evidence from multiple sources and decades of documentation creates a compelling case that challenges conventional explanations. But the Hartwell family's collection represents just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The government extends far beyond federal agencies have been quietly monitoring these encounters for decades, implementing protocols that suggest they recognize these creatures as genuine phenomena requiring careful management. 3 weeks after Thomas Hartwell's first encounter in 1992, a black sedan with government plates pulled into his driveway. Two men in dark suits identified themselves as wildlife investigators from an unnamed federal agency. They spent 4 hours questioning Thomas about what he had seen, photographing his plaster casts, and taking measurements of the claw marks on his trees. The men offered no explanations for their visit and left with copies of all his evidence. Thomas never received any follow-up contact or official reports about their investigation. The same pattern repeated after Michael's 2008 encounter. Within 5 days, unmarked vehicles appeared on rural roads surrounding the Hartwell property. Neighbors reported seeing men with official-looking credentials asking questions about unusual wildlife activity in the area. The visitors carried sophisticated equipment including cameras, measurement tools, and what appeared to be sample collection kits. They focused particular attention on properties adjacent to the Hartwell land, apparently mapping the creature's territorial range. David's September 2025 encounter triggered the most extensive government response yet. 4 different agencies sent representatives to investigate within a 2-week period. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service agents arrived first, followed by Department of Agriculture personnel, then unidentified investigators claiming to represent Homeland Security interests. Each group conducted separate interviews with David and examined different aspects of the encounter site. None of the agencies coordinated their efforts or shared information with the others. Similar government response patterns have emerged at cryptid hotspots across the country during 2025. Wisconsin researchers document federal investigators arriving within days of documented encounters in the Chequamegon National Forest region. Michigan witnesses report unmarked government vehicles conducting surveillance around encounter sites in the Upper Peninsula. Minnesota property owners describe official visits from multiple agencies following Dogman sightings near the Boundary Waters area. The consistency of response suggests established protocols for handling these situations. The most revealing evidence comes from witnesses who have been approached by government representatives offering non-disclosure agreements. Patricia Morrison from Rhinelander, Wisconsin, received a visit from 2 federal agents 3 days after reporting a Dogman encounter to local authorities. The agents presented her with a document requiring her silence about the encounter in exchange for financial compensation. Morrison refused to sign but photographed the agreement before returning it. The document contained official letterhead from an agency she had never heard of and referenced ongoing national security investigations into unknown wildlife species. Evidence confiscation has become a disturbing pattern at encounter sites across multiple states. Trail camera footage disappears mysteriously after witnesses report encounters to authorities. Physical evidence including hair samples, footprint casts, and damaged equipment vanishes from private property without explanation. Witnesses describe finding their homes searched and evidence collections removed while they were away. Local law enforcement agencies claim no knowledge of these activities and direct inquiries to federal authorities who refuse to provide information. Former government employees have begun speaking out about classified programs they claim monitor cryptid activity. Dr. Marcus Thompson worked as a wildlife biologist for the Department of Interior from 1995 to 2018. Thompson claims his agency maintained detailed databases of anomalous wildlife encounters and conducted covert investigations at encounter sites. According to Thompson, the program operated under strict classification protocols and agents were required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements about their work. Thompson describes rapid response teams that deployed to encounter locations within 24 to 48 hours of reported sightings. These teams collected physical evidence, interviewed witnesses, and conducted environmental assessments to determine if encounters posed public safety risks. The teams had authority to confiscate evidence and pressure witnesses to remain silent about their experiences. Thompson claims the program documented hundreds of encounters manually but classified all findings to prevent public awareness of the phenomenon. Military installations near cryptid hotspots have reported unusual security incidents that match creature descriptions from civilian encounters. Fort McCoy in Wisconsin documented multiple perimeter breaches by unknown intruders between 2020 and 2025. Security camera footage captured large bipedal figures moving through restricted areas, but official reports classified the incidents as equipment malfunctions. Base personnel were instructed not to discuss the breaches with civilian authorities or media representatives. The secrecy surrounding government knowledge of these creatures raises disturbing questions about what agencies have discovered through decades of covert investigation. The consistent response patterns suggest established protocols that recognize these creatures as real phenomena requiring management and containment. The pressure on witnesses to remain silent indicates concerns about public reaction if the truth about Dogman existence became widely known. Government agencies appear to be walking a careful line between acknowledging the reality of these encounters and preventing public panic about dangerous unknown species living in North American wilderness areas. The classification of research findings and suppression of evidence suggests they possess far more information about these creatures than they are willing to reveal. But government secrecy alone cannot explain why 2025 has produced such an unprecedented surge in encounters. Multiple factors appear to be converging to create perfect conditions for increased human cryptid contact. The 2025 surge explained. Environmental pressures have created a cascade of disruptions that explain why 2025 has become the year everything changed. Climate change has emerged as the primary driving force behind the unprecedented surge in Dogman encounters. Rising temperatures across North America have disrupted traditional weather patterns that these creatures have relied on for decades. Average winter temperatures in the Great Lakes region have increased by 3.2 degrees Fahrenheit since 2020, causing earlier snowmelts and extended periods of bare ground that expose creature movements to human observation. Summer heat waves lasting longer than historical norms have forced creatures to seek water sources closer to human settlements, increasing the likelihood of encounters. The expansion of human development into previously untouched wilderness areas has compressed creature territories and forced them into contact with human populations. Logging operations across northern Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota have removed over 400,000 acres of old-growth forest since 2020. These ancient forests provided the dense canopy cover and minimal human intrusion that creatures preferred for their core territorial areas. Construction of new housing developments, recreational facilities, and access roads has fragmented the continuous forest corridors that creatures used for movement between territories. Natural gas pipeline construction projects have carved linear clearings through prime creature habitat, creating barriers that disrupt traditional movement patterns. The 340-mile pipeline project connecting Minnesota to Wisconsin created a continuous cleared corridor that bisects known creature territories. Construction activities included round-the-clock lighting, heavy machinery operation, and hundreds of workers in areas that had experienced minimal human presence for generations. These disruptions forced creatures to find new routes and territories, bringing them into contact with human populations along the periphery of development zones. Technology improvements have revolutionized documentation capabilities, allowing researchers to capture evidence that would have been impossible to record just 5 years ago. High-resolution trail cameras equipped with infrared flash systems now provide crystal-clear images and video footage of encounters. Motion sensor technology has advanced beyond simple heat detection to include microwave sensing arrays that eliminate false triggers from vegetation movement. AI-powered analysis systems achieve 94% accuracy in distinguishing genuine encounters from hoaxes, providing researchers with reliable tools to evaluate evidence and identify authentic anomalies. Smartphone camera quality has reached professional levels, with 4K video recording and enhanced low-light performance allowing witnesses to capture clear footage during nighttime encounters. Social media platforms provide instant sharing capabilities that encourage witnesses to document and report encounters immediately rather than keeping them secret. GPS technology in smartphones automatically records exact coordinates and timestamps for encounter locations, providing researchers with precise data for mapping territorial patterns and movement corridors. The controversial theory that creatures are becoming more aggressive due to territorial pressure gains support from encounter analysis showing increased boldness and direct approaches to human dwellings. Territorial compression caused by habitat loss may be forcing creatures to defend smaller areas more aggressively. Competition between creatures for remaining suitable habitat could be driving confrontational behavior that brings them into closer contact with humans. The traditional avoidance patterns that creatures exhibited in previous decades appear to be breaking down as available territory shrinks. Social media platforms have created support networks that encourage witnesses to share experiences they previously kept secret due to fear of ridicule or disbelief. Facebook groups dedicated to cryptid research now include over 180,000 members who provide validation and support for encounter witnesses. YouTube channels focusing on Dogman investigations have gained massive followings, creating platforms where witnesses feel comfortable sharing their stories publicly. Reddit communities provide anonymous forums where people can describe encounters without revealing their identities or locations. These online communities have broken down the isolation that previously prevented witnesses from reporting encounters. People who experienced encounters decades ago are now coming forward after discovering that others have faced similar situations. The normalization of cryptid discussions through social media has reduced the stigma associated with reporting unusual wildlife encounters. Witnesses find strength in numbers and feel empowered to speak publicly about experiences they once considered too bizarre to share. The generational cycle theory explains the 2025 surge as part of predictable patterns that repeat every 15 to 20 years in established territories. Research data shows that encounter clusters occur in regular cycles, with peak activity periods followed by years of minimal sightings. The current surge aligns with predicted peak cycles in regions that experienced high activity during 2005 to 2007 and again during 1990 to 1992. These cycles may correspond to creature breeding patterns, territorial establishment phases, or environmental factors that influence creature behavior. Evidence suggests that multiple cryptid species may be involved in reported encounters rather than a single type of creature. Witness descriptions vary significantly in terms of size, coloration, facial features, and behavior patterns. Some encounters describe creatures standing 6 to 7 feet tall, while others report individuals reaching 9 to 10 feet in height. Fur color ranges from dark gray to reddish-brown to black, suggesting either multiple species or significant individual variation within a single species. The most disturbing development involves creatures adapting to human technology and becoming bolder in their interactions. Multiple witnesses report creatures examining trail cameras, security equipment, and vehicles with apparent curiosity rather than fear. The systematic destruction of recording equipment suggests creatures understand the documentation function of cameras and actively work to prevent evidence collection. This technological awareness indicates intelligence levels that exceed simple animal cognition and raises profound questions about what we're actually dealing with in North American wilderness areas. What this means for all of us. The implications of this discovery extend far beyond academic curiosity. Accepting that Dogman creatures are real and their encounters are increasing forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about North American wildlife. Our current understanding of ecosystem management assumes we have identified and cataloged all major species living in our forests. Wildlife management agencies base their conservation strategies, hunting regulations, and habitat protection plans on the belief that no significant unknown species exist in regions where humans have lived for centuries. The presence of intelligent, large predators that have remained hidden challenges the fundamental assumptions underlying modern wildlife science. State and federal agencies would need to completely restructure their approach to forest management and public land use. Current protocols assume that the largest predators in most regions are black bears, with occasional mountain lions in western territories. Rangers and wildlife officers receive training based on known species behavior patterns and response strategies. Discovering that creatures weighing 400 to 500 pounds with apparent high intelligence inhabit these same forests would require new training programs, different safety protocols, and revised emergency response procedures. The implications extend beyond wildlife management to fundamental questions about North American natural history. If creatures this large have lived alongside humans for generations without scientific recognition, what other species might exist in remote wilderness areas? The Pacific Northwest contains millions of acres of old-growth forest that remain largely unexplored. Alaska's interior holds vast regions where human foot traffic occurs perhaps once per decade. The boreal forests stretching across Canada represent one of the largest wilderness areas on the planet, with countless valleys and mountain ranges where unknown species could exist without human detection. Rural communities in hotspot areas face immediate safety concerns that current emergency services are not equipped to handle. Local sheriff departments in northern Wisconsin, Michigan, and upstate New York typically deal with domestic disputes, traffic violations, and occasional wildlife nuisance calls involving bears or coyotes. Responding to reports of aggressive encounters with 8-foot-tall bipedal predators would require specialized training, equipment, and protocols that most rural law enforcement agencies currently lack. Emergency response times in remote areas often exceed 30 minutes, creating dangerous situations if residents encounter hostile creatures. Outdoor enthusiasts who spend time in wilderness areas need accurate information about potential risks they may face. Hikers, hunters, campers, and fishermen currently prepare for encounters with known wildlife using established safety guidelines. Bear spray works effectively against black bears and mountain lions. Making noise while hiking helps. Avoid surprising most large mammals. Proper food storage prevents attracting scavengers to campsites. These traditional precautions may prove inadequate against intelligent creatures that show no fear of humans and deliberately test security measures. The development of new safety protocols would require extensive research into creature behavior patterns, territorial ranges, and response to human presence. Initial recommendations might include avoiding known hotspot areas during peak activity periods between September and November. Traveling in groups rather than alone could provide better security through numbers and multiple witnesses. Carrying communication devices capable of summoning help even in areas without cell service becomes essential when traditional safety assumptions no longer apply. Wildlife management agencies would need to establish monitoring programs to track creature populations, movements, and territorial boundaries. Understanding whether these represent stable populations or expanding ranges affects how authorities respond to increasing encounter reports. Population estimates become crucial for determining whether creatures face extinction pressure or pose growing threats to human communities. Genetic analysis of collected samples could reveal whether multiple species exist or if regional variations represent subspecies of a single type. Scientific research opportunities presented by studying an unknown intelligent species are unprecedented in modern biology. Behavioral studies could examine problem-solving abilities, communication methods, social structures, and learning capacity. Cognitive research might reveal intelligence levels that challenge our understanding of animal consciousness and awareness. Comparative analysis with known species could provide insights into evolution, adaptation, and the development of intelligence in large mammals. The Hartwell family's decision to speak publicly about their 3-generation encounters demonstrates the courage required to challenge scientific orthodoxy and social skepticism. Their willingness to share decades of documented evidence, despite potential ridicule and privacy concerns, may encourage other families and individuals to come forward with similar experiences. Breaking the silence that has surrounded these encounters for generations creates opportunities for researchers to identify patterns, compare evidence, and build comprehensive databases of creature activity. Serious scientific investigation requires moving beyond dismissive attitudes that have historically characterized responses to cryptid reports. Academic institutions need to establish research programs that apply rigorous scientific methods to examine physical evidence, witness testimonies, and environmental factors associated with encounters. Peer review processes should evaluate cryptid research using the same standards applied to other wildlife studies, focusing on evidence quality rather than preconceived assumptions about what species can or cannot exist. The 2025 surge in documented encounters may represent just the beginning of increased human cryptid contact as environmental pressures intensify. Climate change continues altering traditional habitat ranges and prey availability. Development pressure expands into previously untouched wilderness areas. Recreational use of remote forests increases as urban populations seek outdoor experiences. These converging factors suggest that encounters will become more frequent rather than less common in coming years. Government transparency about existing knowledge becomes increasingly urgent as encounter numbers rise and public safety concerns grow. If federal agencies possess decades of research data, witness testimonies, and physical evidence about these creatures, withholding this information from the public serves no constructive purpose. Citizens living in affected areas deserve access to information that could help them make informed decisions about their safety and activities in wilderness regions. The possibility that intelligence exists in forms we never recognized forces us to reconsider our relationship with the natural world around us. For centuries, humans have assumed dominance over North American ecosystems based on our belief that we represent the pinnacle of intelligence and awareness. Discovering that we share our forests with creatures possessing sophisticated problem-solving abilities, complex communication skills, and multi-generational territorial knowledge challenges fundamental assumptions about human uniqueness and environmental mastery. We may need to accept that vast wilderness areas harbor secrets we never imagined and intelligence that has observed us far longer than we've been aware of them. The creatures that stalk the Hartwell property for 3 decades demonstrate patience, strategic thinking, and behavioral adaptation that suggests we are not the only intelligent species calling North America home. What the Hartwells experienced may be just one story among thousands waiting to be told. The evidence demands serious investigation rather than continued dismissal. The Hartwell family's 3 decades of encounters represent just one thread in a tapestry that stretches across North America. Their story connects to hundreds of other families who have faced the same terror in Wisconsin forests, Michigan wilderness, and Minnesota backwoods. The 2025 surge has revealed patterns that researchers are finally beginning to understand. These creatures have been watching us far longer than we have been aware of them. Consider what other secrets hide in the millions of acres of unexplored wilderness across this continent. If you have experienced something you cannot explain, document it and share your story with serious researchers working to solve this puzzle.